Okay. Okay. Do you have a notification that says that? Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Okay. Well, hey, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. We are rejoined by our returning champion, the brilliant Canadian historian, NGO critic, media critic, journalist, anti-imperialist thinker, and campaigner, Yves Engler, who's also a member of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and a member of Disruption Canada. And yeah, we're going to be talking, of course, it's our All Things Canada edition, but we're going to specifically be talking about Haiti. And we're of limited time, so we're just going to get straight into it. So, Yves, first of all, thanks for coming back on the program, especially on such short notice.
Thanks for having me.
Always an honor to have you on. And yeah, Yves, the reason why I wanted to have you on is because Haiti has been in the news. The ongoing the ongoing political crisis in Haiti is only deteriorating with this murder of Jovenal Moise, the Neo-Duvalist Western puppet that's been in power, and I sort of don't know how to respond to it and what this means for Haiti. So that's why I want to have you on. So first of all, so talk to us about. So just remind viewers very briefly what is happening in Haiti, Canada's role in Haiti. This Jovenal Moise guy, who was facing massive amount of popular discontent, not backed by the West, and now he's out of the blue. He was murdered, and so so talk about all of that, and who do you think were the forces behind his murder, and what this means for the ongoing tragic imperial project that's in Haiti.
Well, first of all, I don't know if you saw, but there was an earthquake in Haiti today, and there's now reporting that it was about 150 kilometers west of Port-au-Prince, and they're saying at least 200. Al Jazeera was saying at least 227 people have died, but they're actually expecting that number to go up. And I think I think person said in the hospital in Les Cayes was like overflowing, and it doesn't look like it's hit. It's a little bit further away from Port-au-Prince than that terrible earthquake in 2010, which killed tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands. But so that's a really unfortunate, tragic development. But yeah, with regards to Jovenal and the context of that, I mean, I think basically Jovenal, as you mentioned, is a very unpopular, very little constitutional legitimacy. He basically has no constitutional legitimacy. The little bit he had really was ended on February 7th. But I see his assassination in a negative light, and in a sense that basically it's the sort of total disintegration of Haitian political life. And before he was killed a month ago, the violence and kidnapping, instability in Port-au-Prince we've just been getting worse and worse and worse. Where people, it's just being basically, a sense of terror among just general population.
State terrorism.
Yeah, state terror, but I mean, but really, the disintegration. I mean, unfortunately, the disintegration, where how much of it is political, how much of it is sort of gangs in different communities that are just sort of kind of running amok. So and I think that the context that's important to understand in this is that basically for 10 years we have been propping up and backing political forces that are Neo-Duvalists, so supporters of the 30-year-long dictatorship of the Papa and Baby Doc.
Yeah.
Michel Martelly, who's the person who put Jovenal Moise in place, was a member of the Tonton Macoute, the thugs of the Duvalier regime, and basically we empowered, put into place initially, and empowered these drug running, violent mafioso types, and I think Jovenel's assassination is sort of the culmination of these forces that we've empowered. What the specific dispute that led to him being killed, I don't really know. Clearly a big faction of his PHTK political party was involved in it. Clearly the police were involved with it, or important elements of the police were involved with it, and probably it was financed by some of the oligarchs who had a falling out with Jovenel. So I think that so on one hand, it's the culmination of the sort of empowering this Michel Martelly, and then Jovenel, who's Michel Martelly put Jovenel in place, and the way that we empowered Michel Martelly was very concrete. I mean, there was many facets to it, but in very intense form. Basically, after the earthquake, they used the weakness of the Haitian government of René Préval, and basically in the elections, they forced an election quickly after the earthquake, amidst more than 1 million people living in not having houses and all kinds of difficult sort of logistical situation. Wow. Then there was the cholera outbreak that began about a bit over a month before the earthquake, before the election, which was cholera is introduced by UN troops, and but nonetheless we won an election because we didn't want René Préval to continue on, and because he was a mild sort of social democratic politician, and so when René Préval's party's candidate was in second place and Michel Martelly was in third place, they just literally said, no, that's not right. It's Michel Martelly should be in second place. And Hillary Clinton, Canada's foreign minister, Lawrence Cannon, Hillary Clinton actually goes down to Haiti, and they push this Organization of American States mission, electoral mission, to look into these allegations of fraud, and they come up with no reason. They have no rationale for saying that Michel Martelly has more votes than Préval party's candidate, but they just basically force it. They threaten them with cutting off the visas, they threaten cutting off aid, and they succeed. And Martelly gets into the second round, and then he wins in quotation the election, and then we back him the whole way through. When it becomes clearer and clearer, when he brings Jean-Claude Duvalier back, right, who'd been in exile for 30 years. He allows him come back, and he tells the New York Times that there's only some foreign forces that want to prosecute Jean-Claude, as if there was no one in Haiti that was angry that their kids or their parent or their whatever was killed by Jean-Claude's.
Wow.
So and then literally Jovenal Moise is not known, right? He's not known. Michel Martelly was known. He was a singer. He was a well-known right-wing, person, but he was at least known. He had some certain amount of personal popularity. Jovenal Moise wasn't even really known, and he was just basically selected by Michel Martelly. And there's all kinds of huge question marks about the elections, and they had to redo the election, all kinds of, but basically, so on one hand, we empowered this PHTK party of Martelly and Moise. That was, basically just the mafiosos. On the other hand, we destroyed the most popular political party in Haitian history, which was the Famille Lavalas, which in the last really proper elections in 2000, won more than 70% of the positions, and for about 7,000 positions across the country, from mayors to legislatures. And of course, the far and away the most popular politician in the country, Jean-Bertrand Aristide,
Yeah.
later in the 2000 election, wins the presidential election. So we destroyed Famille Lavalas and the sort of popular forces behind that. It happened in many different ways, but most
Exactly.
with the 2004 coup, where U.S., French, Canadian troops invaded Haiti, and that began the UN occupation force, which, in a formal sense, was there for 15 years and sort of basically continues in a smaller form today. One of the things that right now so after Moise's assassination, there was he had just appointed a new prime minister. Now this is totally unconstitutional, because Moise was de facto, he wasn't legitimate, and you have to have the legislature and parliament agree to the prime minister in Haiti. That's the constitutional. And so he had appointed a new prime minister like 2 days before he was assassinated. But basically, the guy he appointed, Ariel Henry, wasn't sworn in. Now, he would no matter what, he would have been like an illegitimate prime minister, but he still hadn't even gone through a basic sense of the swearing in. Now, the former prime minister, who was again de facto not legitimate, Claude Joseph, claimed he was the proper prime minister, and then there was the new guy that Moise had just appointed, Ariel Henry, and then the head of the Senate, or a member of the Senate. There's only 10 senators. There's only 10 elected senators left in the country. He then said, in fact, he was the person who should take over because he had the most legitimacy, and the Senate got behind him, and it was the only body that had anybody elected left in the country. But so this is happening. So there's three different people claiming to be the prime minister, and initially it looked like Claude Joseph was going to be supported. Anyways, basically this group called the Core Group, which is the U.S., France, Germany, Spain, Brazil, OAS representative, UN representative, just said that no, in fact, Ariel Henry is the legitimate prime minister. And then within 48 hours, everyone just goes behind Ariel Henry. So like basically you have this body who's just like puts out it's like appointing prime ministers by communique, by like, foreign press release, which just speaks to how colonized or imperially dominated Haiti is. And this core group comes out of a UN resolution that basically created the UN mission of the MINUSTA mission. So two months after the coup against Aristide and thousands of other elected officials in 2004, they create this core group thing. The UN, it's in an actual UN resolution. And so, to a large extent for the last 17 years, that's, sort of who's been running Haiti, which is this core group body, which is really the real forces in it are the US, obviously primarily, secondarily Canada, thirdly France, and it's obviously the situation in Haiti is disastrous, and also the sort of just open imperial attitude, imperial policy is really stark. And I wrote a thing recently about the core group and how, almost everyone, I haven't done a survey of this. I haven't been in Haiti in a long time, and I haven't done a survey of it. And so I can't say this with 100% confidence. And I haven't seen a survey done of it, but I say this with a high level of confidence that almost everyone who's like a little bit, who pays attention to the news in Haiti knows what the core group is. Almost everyone who reads the Globe and Mail, who reads, even people who call themselves like foreign policy academics in Canada, has no idea what the core group is, right? And so those who are part of the dictating two it's like we don't know nothing about it. Those who are receiving the dictates, it's widely understood, and I think that's just reflective. I mean, it's a microcosm of being in the imperial center or being in the dominated. And Haiti, in the case of Haiti, very clearly, Canada is the imperial center, and the vast majority of Canadians have no idea. They don't know that we're part of this. Like, imagine the Jamaican, Filipino, Congolese, and Bangladeshi ambassadors in Ottawa have this little group that they call themselves the core group. They meet together, they meet with Canadian officials, they put out communiques, say, hey, this is what we think should happen in Canadian politics. Hey, this is who we think should be prime minister. I mean, that's what it is, essentially. I mean, and so someone called it, what's his face, Jake Johnson, I think, called it the fourth branch of the Haitian government. He called the core group the fourth branch of the Haitian government. But I think that's probably an underestimate of its influence, right? It's something beyond the fourth branch. And the fact that it can put out a communique and all of the factions of the PHTK political party rally behind what the core group says speaks to just incredible influence over Haitian affairs. So that's kind of how I see the assassination. I don't really have any sort of particular intel on who exactly did it. Clearly, it's people from within the PHTK party. Clearly, the police were involved. There's no police officer none of his security was even touched. Right, like there was not a scratch on any of Moise's security. So
it definitely was, you think, more or less like an inside job within the within the competing rival oligarchs of Haiti.
Well, I would say it's an inside job without a doubt of a faction within the police and the PHTK political party. We don't know for sure that oligarchs were involved in it, but someone had to pay for these Colombians to, there wasn't cheap, right? There was a certain amount of resources that were put into organizing all this and to paying for some of the different players. So almost for sure, that's coming from one of the rich families. But it's possible that it's possible it was Michel Martelly. It's possible it was Lamouth, who was a former prime minister of Martelly. I don't know what kind of financial resources I think Martelly might have the resources, but more likely it's the Boulos family or one of the other oligarchs who've been increasingly in conflict with Moise.
And you think, and are you and the Haitian solidarity activists that you work with in Canada and elsewhere, because you're mentioning how you think things can only get worse now with the with the murder of Jovenal Moise. So what has Canada and the other partners in crime to Haiti, like, what are they saying that they're going to do now in Haiti with?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say it can only get worse. I wouldn't say that there can't be some positives that come out of Moise's assassination. I think that is possible. That it's possible that it ends up opening up some space for some social movement kind of forces. I would say more that when I say it represents, it's just the disintegration. I mean, it's just that it's sort of symbolic of how bad things have become. Now, could positive come out of that? That's still possible, and it's not. It's different factions of the elite. Killing each other sometimes can work out right. It can work out for the better, right? Even if it's quite messy and violent and unstable and stuff like that. There can be part of why the Haitian Revolution succeeded, right, was because the white slave owning class was basically at war with the so-called mulatto slave owning class, and they ended up giving each other slaves weapons, right? And they were thinking they were just going to be about their own power struggle, and it ended up enabling much broader social change. So it's not possible. It's not that there couldn't be something positive that comes out of this, but yeah. So now what's Canada's role? I mean, I think the Canadian government feels a certain amount of a little bit of pressure. I mean, they just met with a bunch of people from the Haitian community, the foreign minister, about 3 or 4 days ago. And I think it's partly reflective of the fact, well, one, it's partly reflective of the fact that there's going to be a federal election here, and the Haitian community is actually a fair bit of people here in Montreal, and important in a number of ridings. But also I think it's a reflection of the fact that there was one thing that came with the assassination of Moise. There was a little bit, like, people like Jean Saint-Ville, who's probably the most prominent anti-coup activist in the Haitian community. He got on a bunch of, he got on CBC and a number of things. He actually got interviewed, not as much as he should have, but there was a certain amount of space that was opened up. Same thing. There was, was a rally that was done in front of the Haitian consulate here a couple of days after. It got a certain amount of media attention. So some of this message of Canada sort of intervening and undermining Haitian affairs got out there, again, not close to as much as it should have, but I think it did put a little bit of heightened a little bit of pressure on this issue on the Trudeau government. I mean, I think what the main thing they're trying to do now is to consolidate the factions of the PHTK party behind the guy they've chosen, Ariel Henry, and they're saying they want to push towards elections. So actually, it's interesting because the democratic forces in Haiti are calling for, like, we don't want elections. We want a transition government that takes time, takes a year or two, a certain amount of time. There's no trust with the current electoral authorities. State institutions have largely lost their functioning and/or legitimacy. And so there needs to be a transition. There needs to be new people. There needs to be a reduction in violence and just sort of instability, right? Like, you can't have proper functioning, electoral and rallies and exchange of ideas and all that when people are feeling a high level of kind of I don't know, terror, if you like. Yeah. And so they're calling for a transition, and then elections in a sort of more of a medium term. What the core group is calling for is everyone get, this is the proper prime minister. This is the person to lead towards elections, and let's do this right away. And I think the core group wants to do these elections right away for two reasons. One is the fact that they like the sort of election that provides a certain amount of public relations kind of legitimacy. So to say this is elected government, that they would prefer to have that ability to say that. But the underlying or associated reason is they know that it's easy to manipulate the elections. They've been manipulating elections now, well, for a long time, but in a very clear way for the past decade. And so they know that to move towards elections quickly is going to make that easier to control that process. So I think that's the main thing. I mean, the underlying policies are still, haven't changed, where you have, Canada, major player with the police force. I haven't seen any, breaking down, like the guy who's the head of the police has tons. I mean, the Canadian ambassador was meeting with him a couple months ago, and he was the guy who was the head of the police after the coup, and responsible all kinds of killing then. So Leon Charles is clearly somebody who has is tied to Canada and has connections with Canadian police force and Canadian politicians and all that kind of stuff. I haven't sort of seen stuff kind of making it clear like how big a role he had in the assassination and linking that maybe to Canada and things like that. But yeah, I think that basically they want Ottawa's policies want to continue with the same political party and move towards a sham election that gives them the ability to say this is an elected government, there's legitimacy. So
the crimes against humanity and the violation time and time again of Haiti's sovereignty is so mind-boggling, and it's amazing how more and more people don't know this, and more people aren't pissed off about it. So that being said, before we talk about what people power movements and solidarity movements can do, since your country is about to go into a general election. Funny enough, there's many people who actually don't want a general election in Canada right now because of COVID and so forth. But before we get into that, yeah, it's funny. My mom mentioned to me, "Hey, did you hear there's an earthquake going on in Haiti?" But I was so busy with some other drama that I didn't pay attention. So before we talk about what you and your allies are going to try to do to make Haiti an issue in the in the next federal election, let's talk a bit more about how the United Nations how the United Nations has also been a reactionary force in Haitian affairs, because I remember when there was a huge scandal when Haiti last had an earthquake several years ago. I believe Stephen Harper was still in power, and basically, all of the money that people gave to NGOs, Red Cross, and all those relief efforts and so forth, all these well-known NGOs that have a supposedly good reputation, and none of that money actually went into the actual relief efforts, into alleviating the suffering of the Haitian people. It just basically went to the pockets of the NGOs themselves, and to the salaries of of staff members. And we know Oxfam was implicated in a horrendous human trafficking scandal in Haiti. The United Nations troops.
It wasn't primarily human trafficking. I think it was primarily like sex with 14-year-olds and raping girls and different stuff like that.
Yeah, and the United Nations troops introduced cholera into Haiti. So, Haiti is called the Republic of NGOs, and we know that NGOs have been a partner in crime to the state of affairs in Haiti, supporting the coup against the democratically elected socialist Aristide. So can you sort of reflect on that, because it seems to me with this new earthquake, it just seems to me as if, oh my gosh, here we go again. There's going to be more people exploiting Haiti, fleecing Haiti, and whatnot, and just adding to the misery that the Haitian people keep enduring by the West.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first thing with the UN mission, the UN mission was only in Haiti because the U.S., France, and Canada overthrew the elected government. But they didn't want to. Well, first of all, they wanted a UN cover, right? So they got the UN to pass to okay the mission. It's like the debate was from like 9:32 p.m. to 9:35 p.m. on a Sunday night. They got like the Security Council to meet to okay their invasion, which they turned into an initial the MIF, I think it was called the
United Nations mission in Haiti or something like that.
No, there was different names to it. MINUSTA was the later one. The one that people know of was MINUSTA. But anyways, it was a short. It ended up being a 2-month mission. So then the broader UN mission that then takes over from the U.S., French, Canadian troops is just to extend the occupation. So that's the first part. It flows from a foreign invasion to overthrow an elected government. That is the reason the UN was in Haiti. Now, the UN was involved in a number of massacres because they became a tool of class rule, right? They became a tool of foreign occupation and also class rule in a very concrete way, where there was still resistance to the coup in the biggest slum neighborhood of Port-au-Prince, Cité Soleil, which has up to 500,000 people live there, incredibly impoverished, and there was still forces there that were resisting the coup, and these are forces that I'm going to claim that they were all like peaceful, whatever, right? They were political. There were political gangs that had some elements that you would call like criminal, and some elements that were like, resisting foreign occupation and resisting rich people terrorizing their community, right? So, and basically the Haitian police that we were backing were not really in a position to completely suppress these political gangs, and so the UN troops the UN provided cover for the Haitian police to kill people at demonstrations repeatedly. I mean, this happened like in the year and whatever after the coup. This happened like at least a dozen times, probably even more, where UN troops would be there, and there'd be thousands or tens of thousands demonstrating, and the Haitian police would come in and shoot and kill pro-democracy demonstrators. They also provided that kind of support to deal with Bel Air, which is another central neighborhood, poor neighborhood in Port-au-Prince. But basically, that kind of indirect support for the Haitian police repression wasn't sufficient for dealing with Cité Soleil, because it's so big. It's a little bit off on the side, a little bit away. And so the UN troops went in themselves with helicopters. The worst example was on July 6th of 2005, where they killed at least 23 civilians. You can, if you want to do it, you can watch these like kids. You can see these kids that were killed, like baby of 1 year old, this guy dying on camera. He's been a bullet through his face.
I remember watching a documentary that an online a documentary that you recommended when you did one of those online Haiti solidarity things, and I mean, words can't even describe how horrendous the United Nations was in the occupying force.
So they were a repressive force, and then they even after Préval got elected, who was, after 2 years of a coup government, there was Préval, who was sort of associated with Aristide, somebody who was, trying to not just be a tool of Washington and trying not just to back the rich people in the country, and to break away a little bit. He got put under a lot of pressure by the rich in Haiti to give the UN force okay to go in and repress Cité Soleil, but the worst of it happened before that during the coup government, and so that's how you have to understand. So they also, there's all kinds of examples of UN troops raping, everything from raping to taking advantage of their power and breaking the rule, because UN troops are not supposed to have any sexual relations with people they're in the country they're in because of the power dynamic. But everything from the worst end of the raping and terrible stories of young people raped by UN troops, to just having sex with Haitian women in ways that were how exactly how much of an okay there was by the Haitians. Anyways, so tons of babies. There's the sort of the petit minusta, like lots of babies of UN troops, and lots of kids who don't have single parents and left like that. And then the one of the more in terms of impact, one of the worst effects was the UN troops just were dumping their feces in a water, in a river that people were drinking from, and that's what brought cholera into the country, that then led to tens and tens of thousands of people dead. And it's not just that it was like an accident. First of all, it wasn't an accident. First of all, it was bad sanitary policies on the base that spoke to an indifference to Haitian life. That's what led to it. But then after they did it, they continued to be found to be doing similar things. So after the cholera outbreak had killed thousands of people and as this total devastation for the country, they were continuing to follow similar kind of practices, which was just complete indifference to Haitian life, which I think it all flows from why they were there in the first place, right? They were there as part of an imperial mission that was not about Haitians. How they acted in terms of supporting repression was not about Haitian interests. Then their sexual violence and their rape obviously was not, and then their introduction of cholera. So that's a UN mission. At the same time, alongside that, and obviously working kind of sometimes in tandem and sometimes independently, are the whole kind of NGO sector. And that's a big, huge kind of question. But the NGO sector is a huge player in Haiti, and it's been like that. This dates back earlier. This is not something that just began 15, 20 years ago. It's been a country totally NGOized for a long time, where schools and health clinics and a huge amount of what would be the public sector in Canada is run by these NGOs that are generally dependent on foreign funding. It leads to all kinds of it's inefficient, and everything from being inefficient to being basically sort of used to directly manipulate the politics. And in the case of the 2004 coup, the NGO funding and NGO relationships were used to manipulate Haitian politics, and the NGO class was overwhelmingly against the elected government. That was partly tied to their funding. It was partly tied to that they are staffed mostly by the French-speaking, educated 10% of Haitian society.
And safe to say that they have colonial blind spots. They have this sort of white man's burden and this very insincere Western do-goodism. So kind of like NGOs are sort of like the new missionaries. They're sort of like the wolves in sheep's clothing, fox guarding the hen house, right?
Yeah. But in this case, I was talking about actually they're in the ground in Haiti. They're actually staffed by elite sectors within Haitian political life. At the level of Canada, even that's for sure. It's the whole. It's a pretty intellectually absurd idea to be someone living in Canada and to say the way I'm going to help Haiti is by going to Haiti and setting up I don't know what, right? But I'm going to build water wells. Canada's is so involved in Haitian politics. There's, you could spend 60 hours a week challenging different elements of Canadian, undermining Haitian sovereignty and undermining Haitian development. You don't need to hop on a plane and go and build a. If you actually take what you're saying seriously, but they don't, of course, and it's part of a whole political culture, and some of it is just people who just don't know better. Some of it is more sinister. They just, I want a job, I want to go travel, and I want. Right? There's all kinds of elements to how that plays out, but undoubtedly at a macro level, the whole model of foreign NGOs there's no model of development that's going to come from that. It's inherently imperialistic. It's inherently short-sighted. I mean, just at the simple, like public schools. That's one of the battles that happened in Canada, was to go from like church-run schools to like a public school system. That's one of the things that almost all progressive, now at this point, almost all people, but certainly for a long time, almost all progressives supported, because understanding that was not a sensible model of education system. Yet when it comes to Haiti, we're comfortable with that being kind of the model that we entrench, or we support.
Because the West always knows best, and these poor uneducated Haitians, Africans, Latin Americans, they need us to help them, and it's yeah. Kind of like that, right?
So the NGOs in Haiti, there's books and books about criticism of NGOs in Haiti. It is a place where NGOs have had immense power. I think it shows very clearly that it doesn't make sense as sort of a development model. They go hand in hand with retrenchment of the state and neoliberalism. That's part of what you see, and it's not just in Haiti, elsewhere. That there's even a direct history of adopt this structural adjustment program to privatize your economy, and we'll put money in to NGOs to alleviate the social downside of that structural adjustment program. That's a position that the Canadian government very aggressively pushed in places like Ghana, and I think more indirectly in Haiti. So it's not even just that, like at an abstract level, that NGOs, foreign NGOs, and this whole comes alongside neoliberalism. It's really at a one-to-one. Take this. We know this structural adjustment program is going to have all kinds of harm to poor people, but don't worry, we're going to put some money into these NGOs on the side that are going to alleviate some of this harm. That was very explicit Canadian policy in the late 1980s in Ghana. So that's part of certainly part of the model of understanding NGOs, and another part of understanding them is the whole history of missionaries. And missionaries in Haiti, Canadian missionaries have been major players in Haiti for a century. And there's all kinds of dynamics that, like, there's a linguistic element. The whole idea is it's like a French-speaking place. There's obviously the whole Catholicism and voodoo have been in conflict at different periods, and how mostly Quebec-based missionaries go to Haiti and push the French language and push Catholicism. That's had I think certainly undermined linguistic equality in Haiti, and also I think religious, some of that religious tension.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. And let's get to what people can actually do to help end the suffering, the ongoing centuries of suffering inflicted on Haiti, which is. So which is this, because now Canada is going into a general election, which nobody wants, but Here we go. And what are uh, so so before we get into what like Disruption Canada and anti-imperialist activists can do to make Haiti and other and imperialism in general an issue in the elections, I what so if you were to talk to somebody, so since Haiti's had this earthquake, and you probably are going to get many people who go, I'm going to go to Haiti to help to help alleviate the suffering of the earthquake. How would you persuade someone that if they really wanted to help Haiti, here's how you should do it, rather than joining an NGO and being part of that that imperialism by other means network?
I mean, I think the way that you convince people is by presenting what Canada has done, putting that in front of them. I also think that it's really important to bring up what happened after the last earthquake. Right? That's that I think it's pretty widely accepted it was a disaster. The reconstruction was a disaster. People differ. Some people put the blame on Haiti or Haitians more than they do on the NGOs and the foreign intervention after it. But everyone basically agrees it was a disaster. So to not replicate that. But more generally, with regards to Canadian foreign policy and the election, I think that before the last election, we did a whole bunch of disruptions of Trudeau's events and different ministers' events. And Solidarité Québec Haïti group here in Montreal, disrupted Trudeau once or a couple times, and other ministers a couple times. And we occupied his office, Trudeau's office, and we had a rally in front of his office, all either just before sort of in the lead up to election, and some of it during the actual election campaign period. And some of those things are possible to do again. The whole pandemic has just sort of changed all of those kind of dynamics, so it's kind of made some of that a little bit more difficult, and also the kind of people have lost, just kind of doing it because we were gotten a bit of a roll on things, and that we've changed that. But yeah, I mean, I think that the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute is going to try to get some of the different parties to state their positions on a bunch of different foreign policy issues. I think that there is ability to put a little bit of pressure. The one demand on Haiti, the demand I think people should be pushing, is Canada out of the core group, because it's a very concrete demand right now. There's no reason why you need to be part of this group that appoints prime ministers in Haiti, or intervenes on different policy issues in Haiti. But it also opens up a whole broader question, right? It brings us back to the 2004 coup and looking at how foreign forces have been so heavily involved in the country over the past 17 years. So I think Canada out of the core group is a pretty, it's very easy to defend. The problem, of course, is that most people don't know what the core group is, so it takes a moment of explanation on that. I think it's unlikely that an issue like Haiti, and for that matter, most other foreign policy issues, like for instance, the Lima Group, right? Canada's a big player in the Lima Group to try to overthrow the Venezuelan government. The Lima Group is just collapsing, right? And
Lima's out.
Lima is now out of the Lima Group, and so in theory, this should be really embarrassing to Justin Trudeau. I mean, they were like the instigator, really, of the Lima Group, and now Lima's not even part of the thing. But it's just like complete silence in the dominant media. So the ability to, and the opposition parties don't see any interest in trying to embarrass the government on this. So the ability to make that an election issue is incredibly difficult in that context. You have to have, huge amounts of grassroots capacities, which, quite frankly, we just don't have right now. with maybe the exception of the issue of Palestine. And there is an effort to have a vote Palestine in the election campaign. And I think I've been saying this to people that what you got to do is, like, because there are lots of people, tens of thousands really, who came onto the street for Palestine, only 3-4 months ago, whatever it is now, right? 3 months ago. Yeah. And so you can, if you chose a couple ridings strategically and you really channeled that pro-Palestinian energy into 1 or 2 ridings, probably one in Toronto, maybe one in Montreal, and you just had an effort to defeat a Liberal MP because of their terrible policy in Palestine, you could actually potentially affect results. So with regards to Haiti, I think it's unlikely. I think it's possible the Haitian community here in Montreal, you really got things going. Realistically, it would be difficult to pull that off in 6 weeks, because the election is going to be happening in 6 weeks. So I think unfortunately, it's difficult. It's difficult to intervene in the election period. The only kind of foreign policy issue that I think is potentially going to hurt the Liberals is the light armored vehicle sale. Maybe China. China has but that's from the wrong direction, in my opinion. But the only foreign policy issue that I think is a good and important issue that's going to potentially hurt the Liberals, or likely to hurt the Liberals, is really raising the whole selling arms sales to Saudi Arabia, which has gotten lots of attention, people are aware of, and people generally don't like, and so if that gets pushed into the discussion, that's going to be a bit of it's going to harm the Liberal brand. The climate question, theoretically, the climate question should also be.
Imperialism and climate change go hand in hand. They're two sides of the same evil coin. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, people don't view, but climate's not actually framed as an international issue. The whole climate debt and the inequities of climate question is largely ignored by the media, for sure, but also by most vast majority really of environmental groups. So that could be, but certainly I think the Liberals would be vulnerable on some issues, some things around the climate. Yeah, there's a little bit of there's talk about this, the whole no to the fighter jets that Canada's spending.
Yeah. What's going on with that?
$7 billion in new fighter jets. There's a campaign, no new fighter jets campaign. That campaign has really gotten a lot of attention. Canadian Foreign Policy Institute a month ago put out a public letter that Neil Young and Tegan and Sarah, who I don't know, but they're a big band. Sarah Harmer, Suzuki, prominent people have signed on, and it got a lot of media attention for an issue that had mostly not. But thus far, the Green Party is really the only party that's not that has come out opposing the fighter jets. But there's a coalition that might if it can get its get its act together, might be able to get that issue onto the agenda. But yeah, unfortunately, foreign policy issues normally aren't that big of topics during elections.
They get the least amount of attention, and so if people think that Indigenous issues are poorly reported on, if people think that like police brutality, all these and institutional racism, in Canada is poorly reported on, wait until they get a load of foreign policy. Yeah,
that's exactly correct. And so you can. There are ways of impacting that. I think I probably told a story about Haiti Action Montreal here in 2006. We had a campaign in one riding, in the foreign minister's riding, where we put up 2,000 posters with Pierre Pettigrew's picture saying "Wanted for crimes against humanity in Haiti." We handed out something towards 15,000 leaflets. We had a couple of rallies in the riding, put up press releases, press organized press conference, did a whole hard push in that rioting, and it was reported on. He lost, and it was reported on that we contributed. Both La Presse and Le Devoir reported that we contributed to his defeat. But this was like taking the little resources we had, people power we had, and going all in a short period of time into one riding, and we were putting up posters we were wheat pasting our posters onto his election placards, and his team caught us doing that at 10 p.m. at night and called the cops, and the cops came and arrested us. And then we used that to put out a press release to talk about it, and got media about the fact that this was happening. And so like we just, and it's, to some extent, the elections are about, you throw mud. I mean, in our case, we weren't really throwing mud. It was lots of substance behind what we were saying, but how it played out, I think, at the ground level is, the people who may have been kind of thinking about possibly voting for Pierre Pettigrew was like, they're seeing these placards all over the riding saying wanted for crimes against humanity, and it seemed like he was doing. This is a riding actually, because it's actually Justin Trudeau's riding now, and there's an okay sized Haitian community there, but it's a heavily South Asian, Latin American riding, and I think that a lot of people were voting for Pettigrew because what you're supposed to do as an immigrant is vote for the Liberal Party, not because they were doing it, they really had any much attachment or whatever, right? But so by flooding the riding with that kind of message around doing bad things in Haiti, I don't think those people necessarily voted for the Bloc Québécois candidate, but they probably just didn't vote, or they were less likely, to engage in the whole thing. And so you can have an effect, because I think that most people aren't voting. The reality is, unfortunate and fortunate, depending on the moment, but people aren't voting based upon, some deep ideological commitment to the Liberal Party, right? That's not. They're voting based upon this brand perception, and like my church or my community group or my whatever is tied into that party, and that's so that's how or my father or whatever voted for the Liberals, and therefore I do, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's difficult to the anti-imperialist forces are so small that election is happening at such a grand scale. There's so much money put into it. There's so much media attention that to be able to affect that in any substantive way is incredibly difficult. If the Palestine Solidarity Movement or if the Haiti Solidarity Movement could have an effect on one seat, right? Have the Liberals lose one seat they thought they were going to win because of Haiti, because of Palestine, that should be viewed as like a very big development and important contribution from anti-imperialist kind of forces.
So organize, and put it into action to make imperialism an issue, right?
Yeah, but I say, like, go at one riding, like literally just do it all at one riding, and just try to have because I mean, once you're doing, like, we can just keep doing the other work we're doing generally, right? Which is, have our discussions, have our webinars, have our articles, have our books, whatever, just talking about these issues, but that's not engaging with the election, right? Engaging with the election is like, it gets down to, I personally don't want to get involved in like trying to get an NDP MP elected. I don't disagree with too much of what the NDP is about to ever spend the time to try to get there could be some MPs somewhere in the country that may be not the case, that I think they're good enough that it's worth, actually actively supporting them. But for the most part, I'm not comfortable doing that. So then it's, I personally will probably go out and vote for the NDP MP in my riding, because that's the only one who has a chance of beating the Liberal MP and would be slightly better than the Liberal MP. But when it comes to like actual, like, substantive political work, you can either just continue on with the same kind of work you're doing all the time, which I think maybe makes sense for most people in this context, or you try to get involved in some very targeted electoral campaigning that fits in with a broader, Palestine solidarity, Haiti solidarity, whatever kind of anti-imperialist kind of politics.
How much more time do I have with you, Yves?
I should probably go pretty soon because I'm actually kind of shocked that Joshua hasn't woken up yet. But check to see if he's still breathing up there.
Okay, well, okay. One last quick question then before I let you go into your son is, you know, this is the worst time to be having an election with this pandemic. I know there are some people who are COVID minimalists, there are some people who are COVID denialists, and there are some people who acknowledge the seriousness of this pandemic, but are and of course there's debate about the vaccine, whether it's 100% safe or not. But that's another issue which I don't want to get into. But long story short, it's not a good time to be having an election because of this pandemic and all of the. And I know in Canada there's lots of reactionary forces who are weaponizing the flaws that come with lockdowns and stuff like that. And I hate Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party, but but of course, the second major party in Parliament is the Conservative Party. So, do you think, this general election where there's a lot of discontent against the Liberal parties for good reason and for bad reason, misplaced reasons and whatnot, that we could actually see, because the NDP is not going to, unseat the Liberal Party. There's a lot of problems with the NDP, as you mentioned. The Green Party is definitely not going to be making any gains, especially with how Annamie Paul dealt with the popular Palestine protests and so forth. They're both diet liberal parties, anyways. So could we see I just fear that there's going to be a comeback of the Conservative Party, and So in general, what's
I think that's possible. I would be surprised with that. I mean, I don't follow Conservative Party internal stuff very closely, but they don't look like things are totally functional internally within the Conservatives. But the main reason why is I think that the climate. I mean, you really have to be either just not paying attention to the news or completely in denial of human contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, it's just so the forest fires in BC are just so there. The recent UN report globally. So I think that and the Conservatives can't. They still have a big chunk of the Conservative base until not very long ago. Was basically they passed that resolution at the convention, and was that in April, March, where they basically were still kind of like denying that climate change is like happening, right? They're that far kind of, and so it's a real problem politically for the Conservatives. Additionally, I think that the pandemic stuff. It undermines a lot of right-wing kind of talking points as well, right? Because this whole idea that we we can't run deficits or right? And all of a sudden no big deal. The Bank of Canada can just produce more money, right? We've known that all along, of course, but that kind of so I don't think either the pandemic or the climate crisis play to the Liberals or to the Conservatives. My guess is the Liberals will win. I think the best case scenario. I would say it's not. If there was a time when the sorry,
no problem.
if there's a time when the NDP could actually win federally, I think this would be on the more likely times in its history. They're polling fairly well, and Jagmeet is fairly popular. But I think the realistic best case scenario is kind of continuing what currently exists with a slightly higher number of NDP MPs, a minority government with more NDP MPs elected. And I think I would say that's, a fairly, maybe even the most, well, somewhere between a very low liberal majority and a minority with more NDP MPs. It seems to be like the most likely scenario as of now. So I agree with you. I kind of feel like, for my stake, having a liberal minority is usually, it's the best that's existed in Canadian history, really, is to have liberal minorities with dependent on the NDP to get things passed. The NDP's numbers are quite low right now, so that their impact is a little bit less. But so yeah, and of course, the Conservatives winning would almost for sure be even worse than having Justin Trudeau. But I don't think that's that. I think that's unlikely to imagine getting a conservative minority maybe, but unlikely to get a conservative majority at this point.
Alrighty, well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with one of my favorite peoples, Yves Engler. Yves, I'll have to have you back on the show sometime soon, just to do some, election coverage and see what's and see what's going on, and to get updates on what Disruption Canada and the CFPI and other like-minded allies are doing in making imperialism as well as settler colonialism within Canada major topic. But until then, I'm going to let you go to Joshua, and also thanks for coming on such short notice, and make sure you give my best to Bianca and all of your comrades, Dimitri Lascaris and so forth. All right?
I will. Joshua just wants to say, do you want to say, Joshua just woke up?
Oh, hey, Joshua.
he's got to look up just a 3.5 hour nap. So
okay. Well, you give my best to everyone, and I hope I didn't rudely wake him up from his nap.
Oh no, he needed to be woken up, so that was okay.
All right. Well, all right. 1 moment. Okay. So ciao. Ciao until then, everyone.